Okay, I thought I'd start by asking you, actually I have to say that we very much welcome questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand, someone will come with a microphone, and we'll also open up a bit at the end for that. But I want to start by asking you about cultural responsibility. It's the title of the conference, and it's kind of, you know, I want to talk about what it means. Maybe I'll start with you, Kristin Danielsen.
Thank you.
What does the term mean to you?
Well, I think it's a very interesting term to discuss, and I think we're all here trying to fill that with some sort of content. What is responsibility? But I can give some examples from your talk. I think cultural responsibility is about finding the gaps, basically. What kind of problems, what kind of trends do we see out there that we need to analyze and that we need to fix? As the director of an institution, you can do same but different. You can get your goals and ambitions from, for instance, the Department for Cultural Affairs or an Arts Council. This is what we expect from you. You have a staff, they carry a tradition, whereas you as a director, you need to go beyond that. You need to figure out what is it that we need to address right now. And an example of responsibility that you mentioned is actually the building. I've been to the museum. It's a fantastic museum. And I'm obviously struck by the architecture. But when you explain that we're creating a new museum, which usually means that we go for signal architecture, whereas you take the responsibility and you go the other way around. You say that, hang on a minute, it's the content of the museum, it's the story that we want to tell, it's not the building itself. That's an example of responsibility that I found in your presentation. But there's many interpretations of it, but it's always going beyond your sort of job description and figuring out what's happening in society right now. What's going to happen 10, 20 years from now? What is it that I need to make sure that we address? That's one interpretation of the term, I think.
What about you, Christian Seltun?
Along the same lines, but we had a talk when we had breakfast this morning. Anne-Britt Gran, who's here, told us that her students don't read newspapers anymore. And then in the green room, we started talking, and after exactly 3.5 minutes, you told me that your students doesn't read newspapers anymore, which is a big problem. Probably not our responsibility, but I think the cultural responsibility that I try to address from the institution I work in is that we should contribute to the mainstream discourse, the big public dialogue that is kind of going a little bit away at the moment, and it's in trouble. And this means big trouble for all of us, because the whole, what we in Norwegian would say, offentlig ordskifte, the public dialogue, is really threatened. And you can feel that in the theater, in the sense that we are not so visible anymore in the papers and so on. But on the other hand, we still have the same audience figures. It's actually going upwards. So we don't get that backlash in a way, but it's still very, very, it's a huge problem and a huge challenge in the future, also for people to decide what they are going to think politically.
What do you think about cultural, when you hear that term, what does it mean to you?
I would like to follow on the point that you made about finding the trends, or missing trends maybe. Especially when you make a large institution, it is a big building, 150 people staff. You must make the investment as a, let's say, a politician or a civil servant very wisely. You don't make it for a year, 3 years. You make it for several decades. And then the key is in a proper diagnosis of actually what may be these gaps, what are the trends. In our case, that was the diagnosis of a kind of a phantom pain, exactly a gap that in Polish culture today, a culture of a highly homogeneous nation state, there is something missing which had been present for centuries, and then it violently disappeared. So I think this definition of where is the problem, where is the challenge, what are we going to meet, and second, that there is a stable persistence of a prejudice. You may have not diversity, but you have an ethnic prejudice remaining. I think that here diagnosis was correct, and a hope may be that there will be people willing to come, and they do. So in these terms, it was also correct. Some 70% of our visitors are Polish, 30% are foreign, which means that because Jewish community in Poland today is very small, that the great majority of our visitors are Polish non-Jews. So that was a major group. But as I say, thanks to the blessing of insufficient funding, we had a lot of time to think it over and over again. I'm not trying to cut funds from you now, but I mean sometimes it's helpful.
Yeah, I was thinking about what was said here earlier about the young people and a 19-year-old, for instance. How do you make an institution seem relevant and make him or her understand that this is important for them to come there? Because when they are younger, they probably come with their school or even their kindergarten. But when you have young people who are kind of at the threshold of adulthood and they're overwhelmed by information and connected to the whole world, how do you tell them that institutions, cultural institutions, are still important?
I don't think you should tell them anything. I think you should ask them. And I think a 19-year-old is no longer a young person. I think a 10-year-old is a young person. And that's somehow at the age where it all starts, where you start to make up your own opinions, where you go looking for your own tastes. So I think if you want an audience and you want to be relevant for your audience, you need to ask them not what they want, you need just to know them, you need to be aware of them.
How do you do that?
Well, you spy on them. It's even though I now have a position as a director of the Arts Council, this is something that we worked with a lot at the Deichmanske Bibliotek, the library. And when I set out as the director of that library, I kept nagging my employees, asking why? Why do we have a library? Why do we need the library? And then we ended up with a new strategy talking about the people using the library. Because the library means three things from Greek. It means the collection, which is usually sort of the backbone in each museum and library. And then it means the building, and it means the organization. Whereas what libraries are about is the people using the library. So it's not even in the definition. And I think you can't ask them, what do you want? If you ask anyone, what do you want more of in a library? They'll say books, because they expect you to expect that answer. So what we did is that we spied on them. We observed how they were using the services, how they were using the building, and we were analyzing also how they were lending books and so on. And the thing is that soon 60% of people using a library, they don't borrow anything at all, but they still come, which is a huge gap that we can fill with interesting services. But we can't just ask them what you want. You know, like Henry Ford said, if you ask them what they wanted, they would say a faster horse. And then he invented the car. So you need to combine the knowledge about the people using your institution with everything that you and your staff know and your experience. And I think you guys can say a lot more about that from your institutions. But I think your museum is a very good example, going from collection to connection, because you're not about the collection of objectives and artifacts anymore. You're about storytelling and the narrative museum, which I think is a way, again, of showing responsibility, because you are forcing yourself to be relevant.
Christian Seltun, how do you make Trøndelag Theater relevant for young people? I just want to say about the theater, what's interesting is that it was and you told me this, that when it was formed, it was called Trøndelag Theater, because not Trondheims Theater, because it was supposed to be for the whole region. So it's kind of it helps shape an identity in a way. How do you keep that alive and keep it relevant for young people today?
But this was a great cultural responsibility that Henry Gleditsch, who inaugurated the theater in 1937, that he took. He understood that it should not be named Trondheims Nasjonale Scene, as was the plan, but he named it Trøndelag Theater. Trøndelag is the name of the whole region, and it's a much stronger category saying that you are a Trønder than saying that you are a Trondhjemmer, because it encompasses much more people. It's almost 500,000 Trønders out there in the world, and that's a lot of people. And this theater really speaks to that region. And this tradition has kept itself alive in a way. So that's a very fortunate point of departure for an artistic director to start, because it has a very loyal and yeah, quite easygoing audience. With the young people, I guess it's more practical issues that we try to reach them, how we communicate with them, how we give them discounts, how we make special arrangements for them with you know, all these dialogues before the performances, after special arrangements for them. But we see that we have a young audience, and this winter we did a production on the main stage called Doppler, which was a quite experimental production in terms of how it was directed and how it was put on stage. And it attracted a very young audience on an individual basis. So they were not there because some school had told them to go. They really came on an individual basis and bought tickets. And whether or not this has started a kind of trend, we don't know, but we see that, we still haven't really any statistics on it, but we see that there is more young people in the foyer now than it was a few years ago. That might just be a lucky moment, but it's still very fortunate.
What do you think? Why are there
I
more
think
people
the
there?
Doppler production was a kind of a breaking moment for us with this. I know that more or less whole Cathedral School in Katta was there again on an individual basis. It was not something arranged by the school. So it became this kind of trend that they wanted to go and see it. And I think we surprised them by showing a kind of theater that was radically different from what you expect theater to be, but still very, very communicative and entertaining in a way. It's a very funny, very, very funny production. So that might have been it in a way. And then some of them probably come back to check out if they can have a similar experience. I don't know. Probably we aren't good enough on kind of exploiting this momentum that we have, but we will look into it because it's interesting.
We heard Erik Ulfsby, who's the artistic director of the Norske Teater. He was saying that if you want the audience in the future to come to the theater, they have to sort of recognize the stories that are being told there. And I'm thinking about Doppler, and Alan Loe is a Norwegian author who's very famous with actually, I guess, people from my generation and down, I would say, and to very young people. But when you worked with the Pauline Museum, how did you work with telling the stories in a way that would make it interesting for a new generation?
Well, first let me go back to the question of the young visitor.
Yeah.
And actually, I do believe that when you are 19, you're old enough. In America, you cannot drink beer, but you can elect a president. You know, you must be responsible at the age of 19. The problem is that we know we need to have a way of telling the story to the young people, but at the same time, we have a very diverse audience. Okay. You have old age pensioners. You have, Poles, Israelis, Americans, Norwegians, people of different cultural background and different degree of knowledge or ignorance, different expectations. And how you can talk to all of them. And thanks God, what we propose, what we offer, is not the core exhibition. We offer an experience inside the core exhibition. And each experience is probably different. And you have structured the experience differently for 70-year-old Pole or a 16-year-old Israeli. Well, imagine that you have 500 17-year-old Israelis coming for an hour and a half late. And you are to tell them 1,000 years of history in these minutes. So it's a question of how do you show it? And then the soft, not the hard part of the exhibition, but its soft part, the guides, the docents, all the staff, the audio guides, what we propose, what are the paths of visiting for a limited time. There is a lot of room here to be flexible and then spying, learning more about the visitors, what they expect and what they don't expect. I think the surprise effect that you propose that something they didn't expect, you deliver more than you promised. Usually it's the opposite. Companies, people, politicians promise a lot that they don't deliver. I think a part of our museum and a part of the building is that we delivered more than we have promised. And there is this positive surprise, but of course, it doesn't work all the time. It means we see that there are groups of people where it doesn't work. We don't know yet why, We have to learn it. And I am afraid that these audiences will be changing constantly, that we cannot define it once and forever. We will have to keep it, watch it, and change it year after year in the future.
That's one thing I wanted to ask all of you is, how is it different being the leader of a major cultural institution today than it was maybe 10 years ago? What are the challenges that you're facing? Kristin, you want to start?
I'd like to hear your answer, honestly, because of your, the work of this museum has been developed over a period of 10 years, whereas you've had a really interesting political change in Poland. And I see your main aim of this museum is to rewrite this history. That's also how you have been quoted. So I think you're probably best qualified to give an answer, just to start with.
Actually,
I'm very curious.
4 years ago, it was a small institution. Okay, we had 35 people staff, and so now we have 5 times more than it. So it's became big in a very short time. Actually, the challenges that we face today are challenges of any small organization that suddenly expanded, and we have to adapt to it. So, and I'm a scholar, I'm a historian, and my previous position, I was managing a social science, a college of social sciences. That was my managerial work. So I don't have the memory of running a cultural institutions in Poland. But as I see what is stable, what is unstable, is that there is more instability than there was years ago. And it's, take the easy thing, technology. Okay, developing the master plan of the core exhibition some 10 years ago, everybody believed that the multimedia is the answer to anything. And especially young visitors will love multimedia. Okay, today any teenager has multimedia in his or her pocket. We have all of it, Who doesn't have a mobile phone? Everybody does. So multimedia is not a big deal, and it's costly. Moreover, I know that all the touch screens that we have and the projectors that we have today will be very old 3 years from now. Nothing is getting old faster than the new technology. So probably every 5 years we'll have to think again how to adjust to the technology which may be not yet existing. And I would say this technology is an easy part because we know it's changing, we know this is a question of money, but there are things that are changing equally fast and which are not questions of money. Let's say the political environment, which you mentioned, or the cultural changes. That cultural change now is much faster than it was, let's say, in the 1950s, or not to speak about 19th century.
But how do you do that? How do you try to look into the future and sort of meet what's coming before it hits you in the face?
Well, I think I mentioned it. I think about the museum as a process. I don't see it as a fixed institution, which will have to change in the future. No, we are changing every day. Simply the speed of change will be faster at some moments than it is now. Now we rather consolidate. We have expanded so quickly. We do a lot of things, not only the core exhibition, concerts, public debates, book talk, and so on. So now is the time for consolidation. But then there is always actually institutionally, I have a group of people who think about it. I have a process, we have a group of historians who are to review any proposed changes to the core exhibition because changes are coming. Some people come and say, you have made a mistake here. So then I submit it to this group of historians, say, gentlemen, ladies, this is mixed. What do you think about this? And they say, oh yes, we've made a mistake, or they say, no, this is not a mistake. And we find some mistakes, including a horrible spelling error.
What about?
No, I'd like to tag on with that because I think technology certainly has revolutionized everything. And most of us in this room are dinosaurs when it comes to technology because we were all there when internet came along and we were like, wow, this is fantastic, and we still carry that with us. It's a handicap. Whereas for the digital natives, the kids, they look at this as air and water. They only notice it when it's not working. And I think one of the challenges that brings with it is that when you want to consume culture one way or the other, you used to have to physically visit a museum or a theatre. And you tend to open at 11, you're closed on Mondays, and you start your shows at 7. You know, you have all these traditions. And I'm wondering whether that's going to continue, if the new audiences will accept that. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'm not sure, but we're so used to on demand. You know, from my mobile, I can read we don't watch Dagsnytt anymore. We watch it whenever we want to. We read not just one paper. We need, well, if we read papers at all, but we find our own trails in the jungle of information. But we always do it when we want to. So I'm wondering whether this is a change. It may not be. Because on the one hand, it's a gift, because we have never consumed more culture, ever. You know, we listen to more music, we create more music, we watch more movies, we go see a lot of more things. But I'm wondering whether that's going to be a change or a challenge 5-10 years from now, that people will stop. You know, don't you tell me when I'm going to watch a theatre show, or when, why are you closed on Mondays? You know, it doesn't fit me. So I'm wondering if that's going to be a challenge. I'm not sure.
What are the biggest challenges?
I'm not so concerned about that. I think because theatre is a live arena, and that's also some of the attraction to it, I think. But of course, you can always be anxious about it. But I'm not so concerned about that. The differences now and 10 years back, I don't think are so big. But what is funny is to read how people in theatre especially have struggled with the same kind of problems or over the years. I was just reading about Goethe when he was the artistic director in the theatre in Weimar. I cannot remember when that was, probably late 18th century. He would have to stage, they performed 7 days a week, so he would have to stage from Monday to Wednesday. They would do really light-footed, stupid operettas for the large audience. And Thursday to Saturday, they would do more like August von Kotzebue and those things, which are certainly more serious literature, but still quite light-footed. And on the Sundays, they could perform his own plays and the plays of Schiller for a small, dedicated audience. So it was the same situation as today. It's this notion that theatre has at some point been more serious and had a much more educated audience is a little bit false. And I think this is the classic struggle of theatre, the whore of the arts in a way, theatre. So I think we have struggled with much of the same things. The big difference is, and the big difference that has come into theatre over the last 10-15 years, is that the aesthetical diversity and variety has become much bigger. There are now more various ways of producing theatre. We are leaning towards different aesthetics. We are leaning towards a much more diverse palette of means of expression than we did before. And this is very positive for theatre, and it's also probably good for attracting new audiences. Because I think we tend in theatre to underestimate the reading ability in the audience. We tend to do theatre a little bit too traditional, whereas other visual media that people relate to is quite complex, and their reading ability on the visual side is very, very advanced, and theatre sometimes lags a little bit behind on that. That isn't to say that all theatre should be very visual, but sometimes we are a little bit behind on it. And the big difference, I think, in theatre now there are many differences, but one difference is that it has become also technologically much more demanding, also demanding more people running the whole machine. But this is also the same if you go to the ski aerials in Granåsen outside Trondheim, where they do the ski jumping. It's radically different than it was 10-15 years ago when it comes to the demands of technology with big screens and how you are going to be there as a spectator to perceive it. So technology is growing also in the machinery that we put around us.
I would like to go back to what you said about sort of setting, being part of a common public discourse. Because what I'm kind of looking a bit for here is why, if I was a 19-year-old, why do I need the institutions? You know, why are they there? It's not the same as it was 10 or 20 years ago, where you had to sort of go somewhere to learn about something or to see. Now, you know, you have information available everywhere. It's a different kind of experience. But how do you reach out to the audience and tell them that, and sort of validate your own existence in a way?
Well, basically, you need to use the channels of communication that the specific audience is using. Well, if you want to reach out to young people, don't print it in the newspaper. Don't waste your money on a printed ad, for example. And you must simply know it. And there are people who know it. You buy this knowledge. It costs money, but you can make it. And you must address it in a language they understand. But also a language which will communicate who you are. You are different than, let's say, mobile phones operators and, you know, soft soda drinks and so on. Going back to what you say about, you know, that we shouldn't close on Mondays. Actually, we close on Tuesdays. We realized that most of the museums in Warsaw close on Mondays, so we are only in a small club of 2 museums that are open on Mondays. So we have a lot of people on Mondays because the competition is closed. But I thought, why not to open it, you know, 24 hours, 7 days a week? If you can have airports, supermarkets open around, why not a museum? And this is not impossible. You know, there are some technical constraints. You must, you know, make the maintenance. But otherwise, I can imagine it. It will be simply costly. But it reminded me, you know, a few months ago, we are closed on Tuesdays. But I got a message that one of a very important potential donor is coming to Warsaw and would like to see the museum, but it's only on Tuesday. And I opened the museum for him.
Of course.
And then I realized if I open a museum for a person just because he is rich, why shouldn't I open the museum for some other people willing to pay tickets for visiting the museum at 3 a.m. in the morning? Okay, I doesn't have any problem. The problems are technical, but I would say it would take us a few years to develop, for example, finance, especially if you are public institutions. That means I cannot charge, I don't know, 1,000 euro for a ticket. Why not? I just got an idea that maybe I can have, you know. Thank you very much. As you see, this is a great conference. Actually, I learned something important.
But I'll add something to that, because we actually did that in the library. There are always, you know, many analyses. Why don't you go to the theater? Why don't you go to the museum? And then it's usually 2 answers. The first is, I don't know about it. It's not on my radar. It's not that the quality is not good enough, but I have no clue. It's like me and ice hockey, you know. I couldn't care less. That's reason number 1. And reason number 2, I don't have time. Because you're closed at 5 p.m., that's when I finish work, and so on and so forth. So what we decided to try out is to have not 24-hour open libraries, but from 7 in the morning to 11 p.m. So that means 2 hours before the staff arrives, and usually 4 or 5 hours after the staff has left. And it's this huge test of public trust. And so far, it's worked really, really well. So you have your library card, you have a little code, so you enter the library whenever you need to go to the library. And then obviously you say, well, we're a museum, we have, you know, there can be theft, there can be, but it's a test that's really worth trying, because it means that I'm relevant when people actually have time to use us. And back to your question, what should we tell the 19-year-olds? I mean, we shouldn't tell them anything. We should have our hidden agenda, and then we should create our institutions and make them relevant through our actions. What I really enjoyed about your presentation is that you said, we want to seek something meaningful. And that's really quite splendid to say that out loud, that we want people to seek something meaningful. We want them to reflect. We want them to mentally rewrite the history of Poland. That's fantastic. I think that's a cultural responsibility that we should always ask, why are we here? What can we do? But we can work with that internally in our organizations. You don't have to go out and say to a 19-year-old, hey, you have to come to my museum because you need to think about the Polish history. it's just not going to fly. You
But
just
how do
need
you make
to,
him come then?
well, you create a museum like that. Because I think it's not about changing the content or the quality of the product or the performance or whatever. It's new ways of telling the story. And that's what I think have worked in Warsaw. I've been to the museums, it's very easy for me to say, but it's, your aim of the museum is pretty clear. But that's not why people come running to the museum. There are 1,000 individual reasons why they come to the museum, but you can't point the fingers and say, hey, you need to be aware of your history. It's just never going to work. You have to create a museum that invites people, I think.
Well, the way of telling them, I would say this is relatively simple. And there are people who, work every day, maybe not 24 hours, but they work very hard to attract the attention of the young people to things which are much less intriguing than a museum, like chips and Coca-Cola. So if you can make a young person interested in potato chips, it's so much easier to tell him that maybe the history, a colorful history, a dramatic history, is much better than any potato chips. I think we are in a privileged position. Comparing to people who make potato chips.
But you mentioned yourself that word of mouth has actually been a very big part of the museum's success.
Yes, actually, most of our visitors, when we ask, where have you learned about the museum from? Most of the visitors say friends and family. So, this is why I'm hopeful, because I believe there is a snowball. The more people have visited the museum, the more people will be talking about it and attracting others. And I think this is the key. If you don't have this feedback, if the mechanism is reverse, that means the more people have visited your museum, the less people will come because they warn others not to do it. So as long as it works, we are fine. But of course, we help it a little bit. For example, we invite a rock musician to come, and he likes it, and then he talks about it, and 50,000 his followers on Facebook know about it. But this is just kind of like an extended word of the mouth.
Yeah, Facebook is word of mouth, basically. I mean, in a way, it is. Just to get back to the big questions. We've talked about the future being complex, and it's hard to know what's right around the corner. Do you think there's any way that the institutions can help shape the future? And in what way? Maybe I'll start with you, Danielsen.
Well, I think this is what we are made to. This is a part of our mission. I'm paid to make it. And I believe in something which was back in the past called calling, that every human being has a vocation to do something in life. And so this is why I'm a historian now. The difference is not that now I tell about the past using this incredible, powerful means of an exhibition. So by definition, this is what we do, but we change it marginally. Each of us can make only a little change. Societies are complex. We are not very powerful, and thanks God we are not very powerful, because that's very dangerous. The greater power you have, the greater responsibility you have, and we make mistakes. So we make marginal changes. I hope, together with my colleagues, these 150 people at the museum, using public money and private money, we are trying to make a little change and hoping that there are other people working in the same way in other institutions, and altogether we will keep this world from falling apart. It maybe sounds modest, but I think it's extremely ambitious.
What about you? Do you think that the institutions can help shape the future?
Well, we certainly have to try, because the future really sometimes scares the shit out of me. Looking through the presidential election in the US, looking at the political situation in your country, looking at walls coming up in Europe. We've spent so many years tearing down the walls, and now they're popping up again. I think, why do we have cultural institutions? Why do we have culture as a public-funded good in society? And a simple question is to enhance critical reflection. We want people to seek something meaningful. We want them to go home and think. And there are a zillion ways of doing that. It could be a museum. It could be a theatre, it could be a library. The slogan of Deichmanske Library was pretty good, I think, is pretty good because we didn't change it. It's called Stay Awake, Hold deg våken. For Norwegians, it's also a quotation from a rock band, Hold deg våken, Stay Awake, which means basically, you know, pay attention to what's going on, pay attention to society. Figure out your own way in life, be the best version of yourself. And it doesn't have to be grand or great, but it needs, you know, the aim is that people go home and they start to reflect. And I think what you're doing when you measure, when you talk to your audience after the visit on their experience, and then going back 6 months when they've had time to reflect, I think that's really interesting.
Do they do that?
Well,
I'm
he
just
just said
wondering,
that in the presentation that he was
Actually,
going to.
no. This
I
is
think that's interesting.
This is what we are planning to do, because you realized
Yeah.
it may be the mindset of the visitor, his opinions, his or her emotions may be very different when he or she is leaving the building. And 6 months later, actually what we care about is what is 6 months later. And, but this is more than knowledge and the reflexive attitude and critical thinking. It's, to a large extent, it's about emotions. And for us, the key emotion is empathy, that you realize that people of different religion and language are human beings like you, and they deserve it. So I think it's equally emotional as it is cognitive, and hence the whole complexity of it.
Do you think that Trøndelag Theater can somehow, instead of just meeting the future that is thrown upon us, that you can actually influence it and shape it in some way?
I think that would be a little bit pretentious, I guess, to think so. But I really believe in that space, basically. I mean, apart from great acting, spectacular sets, and good stories, the really most important thing is the theater as a space, as a room. As a place where people have to gather. You really have to turn up there together with others. I know it's a very romantic idea, but it's basically the essential of theater in a way, as a part of our democracy. So it's a really important space, and I really believe in it. And I can see it works. We have an average of 100,000 spectators every year. Some of them, of course, we count them twice or 3 times more, maybe. But it's really a huge audience, and people really go to the theater. It's a good thing. But there's one thing I think is a bit that you could also touch upon in this big debate, is the tendency that we, in the aesthetical disciplines in primary and secondary school, in the educational system, we tend to make everybody, practitioners. We want everybody to be, everybody should dance, they should draw, they should create, they should be an actor, they should be, but we tend to go away from the receptive side in the school system. I think this is a big problem. No, they don't read Ibsen necessarily anymore, which is a big problem. We see that because we know it's not on the curriculum when we present one Ibsen production every year. And some of it they read, but that's really up to idealistic individual teachers. So this is a huge problem that everybody is on an individual basis taught to be the creator instead of being really the receptor. We cannot have this society where everybody is going to go around and make things for themselves, because as we also spoke about back in the green room, there won't be anyone to sit down and watch the art in the end if everybody's going to be artists. And this is something that should be really discussed also in an educational, political point of view in Norway, which we tend to put away.
I just want to open up.
Let me follow up, because I think it's crucial. It's not only yes, school at all levels, including at the university level, tries to teach the skills of producing things. Not so much in critical reception of it, and of watching, but also listening and reading. You have hundreds of classes of creative writing. I don't remember so many classes of critical reading of things. Or absorbing all the visual information that we have, which is much more powerful, and actually I suppose young people absorb much more of visual than textual information today. I don't remember any class in critical reception of the visual, which would be kind of a crucial skill of any citizen of the 21st century. So maybe that's the beginning. This is where the audience development starts, actually.
We're not training, we're training people to become artists, but not a good audience, in a way. I just want to, we have a little bit of time, and I just want to open up to the audience if anyone has any questions. For this wonderful panel.
You can ask about the meaning of life, for example.
Can I just add something while you
Someone's
build
thinking.
up the courage? I want to add to that, we've had, cultural policy in Norway is post-war, it's from 45 and up. And it's all been about Danielsen, the classic Bildung, to build the new, all the values. Europe had a broken back, we need to rebuild. Whereas now the times are different, and we have been built in a way, and we've been building cultural capital. Whereas I think arts institutions also should focus on the social capitals, because now we sort of disappear into our screens and we see all these visual images that we're not even sure we can take in. Whereas you say, Christian, the fact that I believe in that space, I believe in getting people together in a room, sharing an experience. You know, it's pretty powerful. We should talk more about that.
We have a question? Yeah.
This one is to Darius Stola. Originally, I was brought up in Budapest, Hungary, and I'm sure that you're aware of the political situation over there. The late 5 years, there has been changes in directors, in positions of directors in different cultural institutions in that country. They are rewriting history. And this is unfortunately, illiberal tendency is going through Europe. And unfortunately, I know that the Polish government is quite influenced by the government of Orban. Are you sure that your position is steady enough, and how you can actually rewrite history yourself to oppose those politicians?
Well, thank you very much for this question. Of course, yes. The new government of Poland follows the Hungarian example, and they are very proud of it, unfortunately. But I'm relatively optimistic. Yes, of course, it will do a lot of damage. But I am relatively optimistic first because it takes a lot of time and many, many people to rewrite history. The communists tried. They had 40 years, all the state, no opposition, no independent media, and they failed. So it's much more complex, first. And if you ask about my personal position, I'm fine. Especially as we have a complex ownership structure, city, national government. So there is a kind of a check and balance mechanism behind my institutions. But there are my colleagues in Poland, especially my colleague who is building a great museum of the Second World War in Gdańsk, really a great museum, major institution, under a heavy fire from the government. So we can watch it, actually, almost every day happening. But my optimism is that, governments come and go. This is the nature of democracy. Once you have better, once you have not so good government. And it would be worse if we have a sustained effort to misrepresent history through many years. And that wasn't the case. Actually, in Poland in the past 25 years, it was, I would say, a great success of bringing back what the communists kept closed for the previous 40.
Do we have another question?
Yes. My name is Kristin Raknes from Carte Blanche, dance company. I saw a bit depressing film with Noam Chomsky. I think he's also a Jewish thinker. And he says that the rich and powerful want us to be more and more individualistic, like staring into our own phone and not talking. And how is the prospect of culture reversing this tendency in the society? Is there any hope?
I think that's for you.
Well, first, I don't necessarily follow Noam Chomsky radical ideas about the world, but I share this understanding of kind of a communitarian deficit. That yes, maybe not so much the liberal democratic systems, but the markets increase the loneliness of the consumer in a significant way. Although, I must say that the focus on individual personality, that's a part of the European Western culture since 18th century, largely brought a lot of good things. You know, human rights and so on, that we should rather cherish them. The question is how to preserve them while not falling in a kind of universal loneliness of the crowd. I think this meeting in the theater, when you experience, enjoy, cry together, this is great. In a museum setting, actually only a minority of our visitors come alone. A great majority of the visitors are either groups, school groups, tourist groups, or families or groups of friends. And actually, you realize it quite late, because we had a kind of ideal image of a visitor. You know, white, middle-aged man, which is not true. Most of our visitors are female. Most of them comes in groups. And I think this is something, the fact that they already arrive in a group. We don't need to make them into group because they have decided to come in group, be it a class or a family or a group of friends. The question is, for me rather, what happens afterwards? I would like them to talk in this group. So when a class comes, I would love the kids to talk about the visit to our museum afterwards, and I'm not sure they do it, actually. Maybe we should check it. So there are various things to be done. I wouldn't be apocalyptic that we have, you know, imminent crisis coming out of. There is still a lot of communitarian thinking, even in the most, you know, post-industrial societies of the present West.
My name is Ellen Bø. I'm from the Museum of Archaeology in Stavanger. I have visited the museum in Poland. I just want to know, when you were planning the museum and the exhibitions, did you, and you said that you wanted to rewrite the history of the Jews, the history of Poland, including the Jews, but did you discuss for who you would tell the story?
Well, not enough. Yes, we did, and there was a clear assumption that the audience will be diverse. That means of a diverse cultural background, which is already a challenge. But because it's been a few years ago, we didn't know what are the diverse reasons for so many people to come to a museum. And only a few people come to our museum because they have an interest in Jewish history. It's a tiny minority. The biggest group are those people who have an interest in history in general. They just know that books in history are interesting, so they come. But the second biggest group are people who come out of diverse personal reasons. Auntie Helena came to Warsaw and I wanted to show her something. It's one of the answers. Okay? We have never thought about Auntie Helena coming to Warsaw. Or the museum I wanted to visit was closed. This is about Monday. I never thought about such a motivation, that you are simply the second best or the only museum in town opened. So there is a variety of personal interest. Of course, there are some patterns. That means probably 30% of them can fall into one general reason. And this one general reason is, I would like to spend my time in a nice and not just to have a pleasure, something more than leisure, and this is this meaning. But in terms of sociological analysis, actually, we only now do it. Yes, but we are not much behind other museums in Poland in this sense.
Thank you very much. We could go on, I think, for quite a long time about this. It's very interesting. Thank you for coming here. I think I have someone in the wings taking us on in the program.